Have you ever wondered why some business people are more successful than others? Welcome to the Mentor List, a source of sound advice with your host, David Lewis. The Mentor List specialises in interviews with top business minds. Listen to their stories, list their habits, and most importantly, gather their advice for your career. This is the Mentor List.
Hi, welcome to the show. Today we have Michelle Gibbings joining us. Michelle is a leadership and change expert and the author of Step Up, How to Build Your Influence at Work. She works with execs and global organisations to help them accelerate progress in complex environments. Michelle is passionate about helping people and teams identify the possibilities, recognise unseen opportunities, and find the courage to make congruent choices. All essential elements to thrive in today's complex world. With more than 20 years senior exec experience across multiple industries, she knows how to help people succeed in different personal and organisational contexts. Armed with an educational artillery, including an undergrad degree, Masters in International Trade, Fellow of FINSIA, Fellow of the Australian Institute of Management, certified by the International Federation of Compliance Associations, and throw in the Institute of Company Directors and a board seat at the Arts Law Council of Australia, just for good measure. As you'd agree, highly qualified and highly accomplished business professional. Enjoy the show. Okay, Michelle Gibbings, welcome to the Mentor List.
Hey Dave, how you going?
Very well, thank you. Really excited to have you on the show and really excited to hear your story. So did you want to, the opening question, as it always is, do you want to tell the listeners about yourself?
I would love to. So I'm a Brisbane girl by birth. I'm the youngest of four. So I've got two sisters and a brother. And, look, my childhood was one of those kind of non-eventful childhoods. I was really lucky. I had a great childhood. And when I got into university, I was lucky in that I fell into a course that I really liked. I didn't at high school really know what I wanted to do, and I ended up doing a course that one of my girlfriends mentioned to me, and I thought, oh, that sounds like fun, and ended up doing a course which was called communications, and I just happened to fall into something that I was good at. As soon as I finished university, I left Brisbane to move down to Melbourne. And part of that was me finding my own feet and finding my own identity. I grew up in a family that was fairly well known in certain circles in Brisbane, and I just wanted to be my own person and do my own thing. So I came down to Melbourne to work for a Member of Parliament and had an amazing time sort of flitting between here and Canberra, doing policy work and research and speech writing and media. And she lost her seat at the next election. And what happens for an electorate officer when your boss loses their job, you lose your job too. And I had the option of staying in politics, and I knew that I never wanted to be a staffer forever, and that I found politics really interesting, but I was not a card-carrying member of any political party. And so for me, it was about the learning and the experience. So when the job came to an end, I packed up my little red Pulsar and I drove back to Brisbane and found a job in the mining sector. And I then had 6 years in mining in public affairs type roles. So I was based in Brisbane for a while, working for Comalco, and spent quite a bit of time in Weipa. And then I was headhunted for a role which took me out to Mount Isa. So I was, spent close to 2 years in a small mining town in Western Queensland. Went out there as a single female, much to the horror of my father and to the surprise of most people out there. It was quite funny. Most people assumed I had moved out there because my partner or husband had moved out. And it's always interesting, the assumptions that people make about a person's career. And so for me, I never had any issues moving. If the role was interesting, I was happy to do it. So I spent a couple of years in Mount Isa, loved it, but the learning for me eventually went, particularly when the new CEO came in. And I looked at this CEO, great person, nice guy, but I didn't think I was going to learn from him the way I learned from the previous CEO. So I started applying for roles and then found myself in Sydney, which was my first gig in banking. And so I was once again in a public affairs role working for ANZ. They then moved me to Melbourne to be a company spokesperson. So I spent a time doing the whole today ANZ said, and I was the kind of the spokesperson for the organisation.
So is this like media?
Yeah, media
stuff?
relations and radio interviews and
wow.
all of that kind of stuff. And look, it was interesting. It was a great role in terms of really understanding the way the bank worked. You had to very quickly come up to speed around particular issues, and you had to build good relationships with stakeholders, internal, external, to the organisation. And I was really good at it, but I didn't like it. And that was really interesting to actually have a career where you go, wow, I'm actually in a job I'm good at, but I don't enjoy it. So I then had the opportunity to work on a project in Asia. So I spent quite a bit of time in Hong Kong and Singapore, still with ANZ. That project came to an end, and I got tapped on the shoulder to go and work on a change management program for a large organisational change and system implementation. And that was the first time I had worked in change. Did that for a couple of years before I got headhunted from NAB, and I then had 10 years at NAB.
So where are you now? Are you back in Melbourne?
Yes, so now back in Melbourne, starting my 10 years at NAB, and my 10 years at NAB were fantastic. I did everything from a corporate affairs role to an advisor to the CEO to head of compliance to an advisor sort of / chief of staff to the group chief risk officer to running a strategy and change function for a large-scale change program. So it was a great 10 years in terms of scope of the roles and also the promotion. So I started at manager level, finished at general manager level when I left at NAB, and then left NAB to go and spend a year and a bit in Sydney working for AMP, running a project management office, strategy and change function for a transformation program. And at the end of that, I then made the decision to open up my own business, which I've now been doing for just on 3 years.
Right. And so this is in a similar field to your experiences.
It is, but the interesting thing was when I started the business, because I've worked in compliance and risk, strategy functions, change programs, I've led large-scale teams. It was a really interesting process to sit down and go, okay, I've done a lot. Where's not only my core skill set, but what do I really like doing? So where do I want this business to be? What's the space I'm going to play in? And, the best piece of advice I got early on was from a colleague who said, Michelle, when you open up a business, be open to the opportunity. See what comes, and you'll very clearly over time get a sense of where is your niche, what's the space that you want to play in. And that was great advice. And so when people now say to me, what do you do? I say I help people deal with complexity. I help people make better choices. I run training programs. I facilitate team sessions to help them get to outcomes. I do one-on-one mentoring, and often that's around career transition or when people feel stuck somewhere and they want to get to that next level in their career and they're not sure how to do it. And then off the back of the book, which I wrote earlier this year, I do speaking engagements and training programs as well.
And do you find that gives you sort of more variety by having a statement like that about what you do? Like you get a lot more different things come your way?
I do get variety, but I also find that when you're really clear around what you stand for and where your value lies, it's much easier for people to go, yes, that's what I need. Whereas if you're really broad, people go, well, that sounds great, but it's almost like you sound like you can do everything, and people then don't know where to place you. And they also don't believe that one person can do everything. So getting really clear on my value proposition early was important. But also what I found was getting clear on my value proposition was about me spending time in certain space to actually have the time to reflect and work that through.
Yep. Okay. So just a question out of curiosity. So running a successful business like that, I would expect you to have some pretty heavy networking skills or strategies. Is there anything you can share with the listenership around networking?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have been one of those people who I see a network as an asset. And in many respects, it's competitive advantage, whereas often people don't think about their network in terms of, one, what are they going to give into their network? Because you have to give to a network to ever be able to actually receive anything back in return. And if I go back to my days in corporate, I would deliberately spend time thinking about my network. Who did I know? Who didn't I know? Where were their gaps? I was making time to catch up with people. I saw having a strong network as a really important part of my role. And so I would carve out time in my day to do that, to catch up with people, to remember if it was someone's birthday, to reach out to people who are new in the organization, to find out how I could help them, but also to get a sense of what they were going to be doing and how that might connect to what I was doing. In running my own business, that networking piece becomes almost even more important. The lovely thing these days is with things like LinkedIn is it's much easier to connect with people that you don't know. But you need to be clear about what does that look like? Who do you need to have in your network? What are you, once again, contributing to the network to actually make it valuable? So I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. I blog every week. I share a lot of content. I proactively seek out new connections on LinkedIn. I also accept invitations from people who are reaching out to me, but I'm really
podcasts with you.
Exactly. Well, that's how we met.
Yes.
But I'm also very clear around, and I think when we connected, I went back to you and said, "Thanks, Dave. Great to be connected. How can I help you?"
Yeah.
So that it is a conversation, because sometimes I find people reach out on LinkedIn and it's like they're reaching out because they want to boost their numbers, but there's no direct sense of, well, why are you connecting with me? And for me, it's about be clear about the purpose. What do you want out of this? Why are you reaching out? And if a person, it's called social media for a reason, because it is supposed to be a social interaction, whereas often people think about it being one way. They're either just feeding information out there or they're doing it to then immediately try and sell you something, as opposed to looking to how do you build the relationship.
Yes. I actually had a similar comment with another mentor that we had on around, building your numbers as opposed to, what networking is really about.
Oh, absolutely. And even if you go back to, potentially the old-fashioned view of networking, which is still a really important part of what you do, when you go to functions and you catch up with people, and you'll see people who kind of work the room and all they're doing is collecting business cards. And I distinctly remember this function I went to where I met this guy and he gave me his business card and I gave him mine. And I thought, oh, that's nice. We might catch up for a coffee. And then about 48 hours later, I get an email from him saying, oh, it was lovely to meet you on whatever night it was. At these events, I meet lots of people and they often want to catch up with me. And I don't have time to catch up with everybody who wants to meet me, but I have signed you up to my newsletter. And I remember thinking, well, that's great, but unsubscribe.
Yeah.
Because there was no sense of genuine interest in me. It was all about what he was going to do in terms of sharing his content. And I remember thinking, wow, how to not build a relationship.
Yeah, very true. And it goes back to your earlier point about giving something initially, and it may lead to something.
Oh, absolutely. And whenever you give with because you want to. And if it leads somewhere, that's great. And if it doesn't, hey, that's okay too. And take that long view with relationships as well, because often you might meet someone and it might be a year before they'll turn around and say, hey, by the way, can you help me with this?
Yeah, and it's a very small market as well, I guess.
Oh, absolutely.
In Melbourne or Australia.
Couldn't agree more.
So, Michelle, you've obviously moved around geographically a lot in your role. How have you found that in terms of your own personal growth as well?
It's interesting. I had this view right from an early age that life was an adventure. And part of moving was part of that adventure. So it's funny because there are some people who find the whole thought of packing up and moving like, oh my God, how could you be bothered? Whereas for me, it was like when you live in a new city and you're in a different environment, you just do different things. Yeah. So when my husband and I a couple of years ago moved to Sydney for the role with AMP, and look, we were only there for about a year and a half. We had an absolute blast.
Yeah.
We're living in a fantastic location. We knew we were never going to be there forever. So we were in a rented house. We had our house in Melbourne. We had tenants in it. And every weekend we had things that we would do. And I remember one of my colleagues saying to me, oh my God, you're seeing more of Sydney than we are.
Yeah.
Because we just knew that we weren't going to be there forever. So we camped on Cockatoo Island and we went to the zoo thing at Taronga where you stay overnight with the animals and, went up to the Hawkesbury, and every weekend we would have things that were on. So it was fantastic. But, in my early days when I was moving and I was single, I'd get into an environment, particularly when I first moved to Melbourne and I knew no one. Mm. I think the only person I knew in Melbourne was someone who I knew from primary school when I was in grade 3.
Yep.
So I had to learn to be self-sufficient. I had to learn how to meet people and build my own connections and social network.
Yep. I've heard the comment from a few people that have moved here that Melbourne's a very cliquey, social, I guess, market. So people have their friends and they're happy with their friends, and it's quite hard to break into that. Do you have did you experience that at all?
I found Sydney harder than Melbourne.
Okay.
And look, it's interesting because I both, when I was in my sort of early 20s, I had moved between Sydney and Melbourne. So, look, it's interesting. I think in Melbourne in particular, if you can find things that you like, if you like football and AFL, if you like bushwalking. So for me, it was about finding the activities that I like doing and then joining clubs and dinners and all of that kind of stuff. So I certainly found in Melbourne, people at work were more social than in Sydney. Sydney people, and look, it could have just been the organisations that I was in. People tended to come to work and then they would leave. They wouldn't necessarily go out and socialise after work.
Yes.
But I think it's very much horses for courses. Some people maybe connect in different ways in different environments. But certainly when you move cities, you have to be prepared to be the one who extends the hand of friendship rather than wait for people to come to you.
Yeah. No, I'd agree with that. So, Michelle, just on the growth theme, so you're geographically growing, and I just wanted to talk through your credentials as well. So, having a looked at LinkedIn, you've been very busy in this area. Can you
happy to. Look, my husband will quite proudly say, "Oh, you're such a nerd." Thanks, honey. I love learning, and so for me, when I finished my first undergraduate degree, it was kind of then just natural that I would do further study. So I did a second undergraduate degree. And at the time, people said to me, "Oh, Michelle, you should go straight to do a master's." But I didn't feel ready to do my master's. And I always say to people, learn what you love. So when I did my master's in international trade.
Right.
And people often said, well, that's a weird choice because you don't work in international trade. But it was about diplomacy and statecraft and foreign policy and how does the IMF work and how does the World Bank work and how does the International Court of Justice work. And I love all that kind of stuff. I just found it interesting. So for me, I knew I needed to get postgraduate qualifications, but I didn't want to go off and study a master's in finance or a master's in project management or anything like that. So for me, I was learning something that I loved. And I do some form of formal learning every year.
Okay.
So at the moment, I'm doing a certification in a diagnostic tool that I'm really keen to start using with my clients. I'm also doing some certification around neuro leadership, which is backing up some other work that I've done. So every year there's something that I'm learning that's new. And part of that is my love of learning, but also in the space that I currently work, it's really important for me to stay at that forefront of knowledge. So I often say to people that I work with when I'm coaching them, be really clear. You have a technical skill set and then there's a soft skill set. And then there's just a general interest knowledge. The more that you know, the more you're able to contribute. I don't see any form of learning as ever being wasted. Mm-hmm. And when I moved through my career and I jumped functional disciplines, I moved from a corporate affairs, public affairs role to a company spokesperson to strategy roles to change management to project management to compliance and risk, and people would often look at that and go, oh my God, how have you been able to do that? And for me, I was often being hired into roles not because of my technical skills, but because of my ability to understand the way an organization worked, my ability to therefore navigate the complexity of that system and to be able to get things done.
Yeah, and it's often seeing that increasingly now in corporates where people really want breadth. So, for example, to get to the CFO role, you can't come up through finance anymore. You've got to have been out in the business and you've got to have that breadth of experience to bring back, I guess, into...
Absolutely. And it makes you more well-rounded because rather than making a decision purely from your perspective of what you've known, when you have a breadth of experience, you're able more easily to take on board different views. You start to see things from different perspectives. It's easier to then understand that a decision that you're making here might down the track have implications for frontline staff and what could that look like. And so it's almost about seeing yourself as a business person or, depending on what sector you're working in, that you understand the organization and the dynamics and what makes that organization work as opposed to going, I'm just this functional expert that sits in this little box.
Yeah, got it. Okay. Yeah, it's very interesting. Okay, so we might just fast forward to sort of current day, and I guess looking back at that very successful career, and you've had very heavy roles in the banks, etc. What advice would you give your former self if you had to select one bit of advice or a couple bits?
Look, isn't it interesting? I'm really lucky. I have this sort of motto, no regrets, and I don't have any regrets about my career. And that doesn't mean that there haven't been times that have been really hard, but out of everything I've ever done, I've always learned from the experience and been able to take stuff away where I've gone, wow, that was tough, but I'm glad I did it. And it helped me be a better leader, or it helped me better position myself for my next gig, or it helped me get a better job next time, all of that kind of stuff. And so I always say to people, be prepared to take a risk with your career. This whole kind of nothing ventured, nothing gained, whereas often people take the safe option. Whereas for me, I used to have this kind of story in my head where if I accepted a role and it didn't make me feel like I wanted to vomit, so that the vomit meaning, I didn't have that kind of sense of nervousness attached to it about, oh my God, what have I done? Then I wasn't pushing myself hard enough.
Right.
And that if you're taking a job that feels really comfortable, well, that means you actually know how to do it. And well, therefore, why are you doing it? There needs to be enough stretch in the role. And the stretch was the bit that would always make me a little bit nervous, like, oh my God, have I kind of gone too far this time? But when you're learning, you always feel uncomfortable the first time you've done something.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'd often say to people, often in leadership roles, it's about asking the right questions. It's about being able to coordinate and work out where you need to go with stuff. You don't necessarily need to have all of the answers. And often people think that when you get more senior, you've got to have all the answers, whereas no one person will ever have all the answers. It's actually about being able to discern and work through who do I need to have involved to help me make those decisions.
Yep.
And being able to build good teams and getting the right people involved. So, and the other thing with your career is have fun with it, because at the end of the day, you spend so much of your time at work. If you can't enjoy it, and that doesn't mean you enjoy every single minute of every day, there are always going to be things in your role that can occasionally be stressful, or you may not enjoy, or you might find tedious and boring. That comes with the territory of any job that you do. And I always say to people, it's, you weigh it up. If you've got too much of that, then it's time to move on to something else. And I often say to people, get ready to vote yourself off the island. Don't sit around and wait for the organisation to do it to you. Be really proactive about how you want to manage your career. And so for me, I was always proactive around what I needed to do in my career. And if I was unhappy, or if I didn't think something was going to work for me the way I wanted it to work, I was often the one that would initiate the conversation with my person that I reported to around, I'm ready to go, what's next?
Right, okay. So yeah, I'm picking up a real theme of growth. So you're sort of you're seeking it out by changing the role all the time in all these different roles in large corporates. So you're getting that, what was it, the vomit feeling or the nervousness coming, and you're pushing yourself. And now you've obviously got structured around your professional development now because you're running your own business, but you're still continuously growing that way, which is probably a nice lead up into something else that may have made you nervous, or a new frontier, which is your book. So it's obviously something you're passionate about. I'll introduce the book, Step Up, How to Build Your Influence at Work. Do you want to talk us through not only the book, but just, I guess, the process that is involved in writing a book?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's interesting because it's a big thing to do. And I didn't realise how big it was to do until I finished it, if that makes sense. Right. It might sound kind of strange. I remember when I was sending off the final manuscript to the publisher, and she said to me, how do you feel? Do you feel really excited? And I said, I feel nauseous. And she said, wow, that's interesting. I haven't had that before. and for me, when you read the book, there is so much of me in it. People who know me well, when they read the book, say, wow, Michelle, it's like you're talking to me. So I share some very personal experiences of things that went well and things that didn't go well. So you feel quite vulnerable and exposed because you're putting out to the world, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, this is what I've learned, this is what I've found. I've been really fortunate. I've had great feedback from the book, and it's been lovely. I had a lunch just today where someone came up to me at the end and said, thank you for the book. And I said, wow, why? And she said, it really helped me make the right career decisions about what I needed to do next. And I thought, oh, thank you. Like that, just when you know that you've helped someone, that's such a nice feeling. But there is a distinct process in writing the book. I had been blogging for about a year. And I'd always really enjoyed the blogging, and then someone suggested to me that I should turn that into a book, and I was like, oh, okay. Hadn't really thought about that, had a few conversations with people. A friend of mine had recently written a book, and I spoke to her and got connected with her publisher. And then once I had decided to do it, it was, this is a goal. You build it like you do a project plan. As I say, as a project manager, you would know this, and get really clear, what deadline am I working towards? And I knew I wanted it to be in the bookshelves by February 2016.
Mm-hmm.
So working back from that, I then spoke to the publisher around what does that mean around timelines. So I knew I had to have a draft to her by August. This was May. So I then sat down a process, and for many weeks I was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
And I was writing for 2 to 3 hours a day. So it was discipline.
So why 4 a.m.?
I'm a morning person, so to get it done, it was always about having to try and find time in the day, and I'm much better off trying to do it in the morning than to do it at nighttime.
Yeah.
For some people, they would be much better off doing it at nighttime, but I've always been the sort of person, if I need to get up early, I can get up early.
Yeah, it's a constant theme with each of my mentors each week. It's very early. 4 o'clock's, you're on par with the earliest.
Yeah, look, it's interesting. A lot of... everyone's different, but if you read bios from some very successful people, they all have very set routines about how they do their day, and often it's involved gets up early. They'll get up early, they'll meditate, they exercise, they do whatever they need to do in the morning. And I'm a highly structured person, so for me, it was just, I used to get up at 5, now I get up at 4. I think the person who was most impacted was my husband, who I remember one morning he gets up at 4:30 looking very bleary-eyed, and he kind of looked at me and growled, and he said, I would never normally be up at this time in the morning. What have you done to me? So, and look, you get into a rhythm. But the bit that I found hardest about the book was not the initial draft. You get to a point where you've been through so many kind of redrafts and feedbacks from people and also from the publisher that you really never want to look at the book again.
Right.
And you know that you have to do one more final review, and also when you go through the process of getting people to review it and write endorsements, and I was very lucky in terms of some of the people who agreed to do it. But obviously they all have to review the book and be comfortable with the comments that they make. And I said to my husband, oh my God, I feel like I'm waiting for exam results to come back in, because there's some quite senior people who have read the book and people who I respect enormously. And so when you're asking them to do something and then waiting for them to come back and say whether they're happy to do it or not. But look, I was really very fortunate. And the book, it's, if anyone's ever interested in doing it, it's actually a really good thing to do, to get all these ideas out of your head. So for me, I built the framework of the book, I put all of the content in, and then I went and looked for research to either prove or disprove my ideas. And I did it deliberately like that because I didn't want to do research and then let that research kind of colour my thoughts, so that I'd end up in that kind of bizarre process where you're sort of going, was that my idea, or did I actually get that idea from somewhere else? Whereas all the ideas that are in there are my ideas, supplemented and supported by other experiences that I've had, conversations I've had with people, or research that I found.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay. Sounds like quite an intensive sort of period.
It is. It's funny because I look at the moment, I've had a really big year this year, and I must admit the other day I thought about it and thought, how did I find time to write the book? I mean, I did, but I don't know how I managed to do it. But it's one of those things when you see something as important, you carve out the time to do it.
Yeah.
When you don't see it as important, it just sits on the back burner.
Yeah. And so how did you make this so important?
For me, by setting the date, you give the date to the publisher, all of that kind of stuff, so you've made commitments to people, and then I told everyone I was doing this.
Okay. So
and as soon as you tell people, you kind of go, kind of have to do it now. And also, I knew that it would help the business, because when you have a book, it becomes easier for people to see who you are and what you do, and there's credibility attached to it as well.
Yeah. And I imagine it sort of leads to different avenues, and again, being open. What was the comment before? Being open to opportunities. So different opportunities again.
Oh, absolutely. Having the book gives you more opportunities to do speaking engagements.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so we sort of covered some of the routines which were in that intensified period. Is there any habits or routines you want to share with the listeners that you think, that you're doing consistently that you think's helped with your success?
Yeah, look, the thing that I had to really get clear on, I've always been really organised. And so structured in terms of what needed to get done by when. I found when I went into running my own business, I had to get even more organized. So the night before the day, I plan my day out in half-hour blocks. So I'm really clear in every half-hour block, what am I getting done and what needs to get done.
Right.
And it's interesting because in my career, I had never been a long-term planner with my career. I was always just happy to take opportunities. I had a sense of where I wanted to get to, but I was never, in 10 years, I'm going to be here. But with the business, I've done that. So with the business,
Right.
I've sat down and gone, okay, what's the 10-year horizon look like? What does that look like from a revenue perspective? When's my next book coming out? When's the third book coming out? All of that kind of stuff. So I get a sense at a macro level what needs to get done in what year, therefore in what quarter, in what month, in what week, in what day. Because what I was finding, if I didn't do that, it's very easy for the days to roll on and you don't necessarily have a sense of whether you're making the progress in the right way that you need to and at the right speed. For people who are listening to this, who run their own business, they would know this. When you love what you do, it's very easy to just let it totally consume your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I had one weekend where my husband said to me, and I was doing some work, and he goes, "When are you going to be finished?" And I said, "Wow, what a really interesting question." I said, "Because there's kind of no finish. I could just keep working." So what does stopping look like? When is enough enough?
Mm.
And so doing that planning really helped me, and getting then really clear, okay, what's important for me? What are my priorities? How do I make sure I've got enough time for Craig? What does that look like in terms of time with friends and family? And how does that all stack up?
So is that now part of your night before plan?
It is. So I'm very clear around weekends and which part of my weekends are quarantined in terms of spending time with Craig. And in my day, I'm very clear around I meditate every day. So time out for meditation. We got a puppy 6 months ago. So walking Barney every morning with Craig, but then also allowing time in the afternoon. So Barney gets walked twice a day, but also potentially fitting gym in, all of that kind of stuff. Because I know for
So you're actually scheduling this as well the day before?
Yeah, it's all scheduled.
Right.
So I know in advance what needs to get done by when. And also I find often when you write a timetable, which is as explicit as 5 o'clock, get up, 5:15, meditate, 5:45, take Barney for a walk. But then when it gets into 10 o'clock, do this piece of work, and you only allow yourself half an hour to do it, often you will get something that might normally take you an hour. You will actually get it done in the half hour. And if it runs over, then you kind of reshift your day, because often we allow more time to do something than we really need to do it.
Yeah, I think we all experience that if we're in corporate meetings and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I go back to my days in corporate, and I used to, on the way home, my husband would say, "Oh, how's your day?" And I go, "Oh, I spent the whole day in meetings." And he was like, "How is that possible? What did you do?" And you go, "Well, actually, not a lot. We just talked the whole day." Whereas when you get really clear on how you structure your day, and I often say to people who I work with, the way the brain works, we get tired as we go through the day. So there's a part of our brain that does all the thinking and the analysis and the processing and the decision making, and it gets tired really easily. And so if you're not using your day smartly, you can waste the thinking part of the brain to do things that don't require as much thinking and as much processing. So getting really clear around how you structure your day, when you're making decisions on things, what amount of time you're allowing it to have breaks and to refresh, all of that kind of stuff. I mean, I often will have, if I'm in the office and not with clients, I might go to the gym at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, part of going to the gym at 3 o'clock in the afternoon is it's not as crowded, so I don't have to wait to get access to machines. Also, being clear about beating school traffic if you're in the car. So I will often think about how I plan my day, and I might have to come into town for meetings. And like, for example, this morning, my first meeting wasn't until 8:30. So technically I really didn't need to leave home until maybe 7:45, but it will take me longer to get into town if I have peak hour traffic. So if I leave at 7, I can be in town by 7:15.
Yep.
And so I will leave earlier because I will save myself time.
Yeah. So this is the kind of benefits you get by planning every night. You get
Yeah, and so I'm really clear about how am I using my time so I'm not wasting my time. Because if I waste my time, I have to pick it up elsewhere, and I don't have there's only so many sort of finite hours in a day. So getting really clear. And I've had to get smarter with technology. So I used to kind of call myself a bit of a techno idiot. I'm very lucky that I married someone who was very good with technology, and getting clear about how I use technology and being smart about how I use technology to help me with productivity has helped. And I remember at one stage, a friend of mine sort of raving about Evernote. And I said, I can't figure it out. I said, it just doesn't work for me. And he said, are you using the free version or the paid version? I said, the free version. He goes, you get what you pay for, Michelle. He goes, pay the $60 a year. Use the paid version. You'll find it actually works. and it is amazing.
Okay.
Because I now use the paid version. And I use it for research and for tagging articles and for doing some long-range planning and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm really clear now around which tools I'm using for which things, and also being clear about when you really need to upgrade for things, because the other stuff as well, there's just so much stuff out there. You could spend your life looking for the next productivity app or the next this or the next that. And so know who you need to rely on to tell you, actually, you really need to use that. It's going to be worth your while.
Yeah. Is there another one you can just throw in the mix for people to check out? So Evernote sounds like that's working for you.
Yeah, Evernote's great. I use things like Pocket and Flipboard. So they curate a site. So basically what they do is you go in, you establish a profile, the sorts of things that you're interested in, and then every week I think you can probably set it every day or every week or every month. I do every week. They send articles on things that I'm interested in. Okay. Same with Google Alerts. I have some Google Alerts set on different things that I'm interested in. And so every week I'll get a Google alert, and it'll be things that have been posted around the world on Google or different web pages that are useful. So it's those types of things from a research perspective that are really interesting. Yep. I also use a tool called Asana, and there's other tools that are similar like Trello, and there's another one whose name escapes me, and they're basically sort of like to-do lists. So I have a to-do list which is for my lady who works for me, and I've got it set in terms of tasks that need to get done Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, things that are weekly tasks, things that are monthly, longer-term projects. So because the lady who works for me works remotely, so we get together face-to-face every couple of weeks, but many times I may not see her. I'll talk to her every day, but I may not see her during the week. It's a great way of just keeping access to, here's what's on the go, this is what's happening. It's all syncs to, between the iPhone and the iPad and the desktop as well.
Fantastic. Okay, so just speaking of useful, is there a book that you'd recommend that you've read, on top of your own, of course, that people should go out and buy?
The one book which I went back to on multiple occasions through my career is a book by Michael Watkins, so that's Watkins, called The First 90 Days. And look, it's a Harvard Business Review book, so I'm not sure whether you can buy it through Dymocks and things like that, or whether you actually have to go and buy it through the Harvard site. Right. But it's a book which, when you read it, you go, wow, there's nothing in there that's kind of rocket science, but it's very practical and useful, and it steps you through all of the things that you need to think about and plan, and the types of conversations you need to be having with people in the first 90 days that you are in a new role. So there's a chapter around the relationship with your boss and setting up expectations around, things that seem as simple as getting really clear, how do they like to be communicated with? So if something's not working, how do you escalate to them? How frequently do they want to have one-on-ones with you? What are their expectations around the role? And likewise, there's a chapter around building your internal network, being really clear about how you establish your team and what does that look like? What are your priorities for the first 90 days? Really understanding the landscape of the organization that you're now working in. What does that look like? It's a really handy book, and it was one of those books where I would have certain pages dog-eared, and I would know that when I moved into a new role, in the couple of weeks before I would go into that role, I'd pull the book out and I would scan, and I'd build a little plan around what were the things that I needed to focus on over those first 90 days, and I'd often go back to it. It's a really handy book.
Great. Okay, thanks for that. I'll link to that on the website, on the Mentalist website. So just finally, if we could grab your inspirational quote that you'd like to share with the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a quote that's actually on one of my websites. So I've got two websites, one which is the Michelle Gibbings website and another website which is Change Meridian, which is the company I run. And on the Change Meridian website, you'll see a quote which says, "To improve is to change, to perfect is to change often." And it's actually an alteration of a quote that was said by Winston Churchill. And Winston Churchill says, "To improve is to change, to be perfect is to change often." And I altered it because I don't think you can ever really be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing is ever perfect. There's always something that can get done differently or better or in a different way. But I love this concept of continuing to change and to love change. So I blog every week, and at the end of every blog I write, "Change happens, make it work for you." And I really do believe that as a mantra, because change is constant and we are living in a world where, it ain't going to slow down. So finding the way to make the change work for you so that you're taking charge of it, whereas often people let change happen to them and then don't like the outcome, but they've sat back and let it be done to them, as opposed to working through, what can I influence or what can I do that's going to make sure that I end up in a position where this change is actually okay for me.
Got it. I like it. Change happens. So, Michelle, if people are resonating with what you're saying here, how do they best go about contacting you?
They can easily do it through my website. So there's the two websites, the Michelle Gibbings website and the Change Meridian website. I blog each week, so I write around things that relate to your career and your life, around leadership and negotiation and influencing and career transition. And you can subscribe to that blog through both my websites as well. So it comes out every Friday morning at 7 a.m.
Wow, okay, fantastic. Okay, and I'll link to that on the mentalist.com.au as well. But thank you again for coming in tonight and doing the recording.
Oh, my pleasure. It's been fun.
And yeah, for everyone else, I'll see you next week. So tune in for another great show.
Thank you for listening to The Mentor List with your host, David Lewis. If you like what you're hearing on The Mentor List, the best way to support the show is to take just a few seconds to leave a rating and comment over on iTunes. You can also find further information about this show and links to further episodes at www.mentorlist.com.au. Until next time, this is The Mentor List.